And hello everyone, welcome back to another Love2D tutorial. So in the previous tutorial we added player lives. In this tutorial we want to add a menu to our game. So to give an example of the menu we're going to create, we go here, we have our little player circle, we have a quit, we have a settings, and we have a new game. If you click on quit, it will quit the game. Settings will be your homework, so clicking on settings will not do anything. And then clicking on new game will start a new game. Then let's go here. And then once we reach our last life, it will give us a game over screen, but we have yet to implement that. But once we finish implementing that, then after the game over screen, it will take us back to the menu screen, and that is what we want to do. Okay. But this tutorial is going to be pretty long, so we won't be doing the ending screen just yet. So first, let's go here to the game.lua file. And let's go to the top. And here where it says state, I want to change all of the other states to false and the menu state to true. So by default, the menu state will be true. Meaning, once we basically start up the game, it will give us the menu state. Not currently, but it should give us the menu state. Cool. Next up, let's create a new component. So component, new file, and then button.lua. And this will be the buttons we want on the menu screen. Unfortunately, the menu screen is legitimately just buttons, so we have to do this before the menu screen. We can just say local love is equal to require love, and then local text, because we're going to need text to display the buttons, is equal to require components dot text or slash text, depending on if dot text doesn't work for you, you can go slash. Both of them work for me. We can now create a function and call it button. It will take in quite a few things, so we'll get to that. And then return button. So let's get everything already ready in here. Let's just say return and then in there. Now a button will take a lot of things. First, once we click a button, we want to execute a specific function for that button. We don't want to implement that function inside of the button itself, because if we do that, then it could cause a little bit of a problem with us needing to basically for every scenario code a function. So it's better to pass in a function and then to execute that function on button click. So we can say func for a function we want to take in. Also the text color of the button, the button color itself, the width of the button, the height of the button, the text on the button, where the text should be aligned to, so the text align, the font size, and I know this looks like a lot at the moment, but believe me, we'll go through all of them slowly. The button X position, the button Y position, the text on the button's X position, and then the text on the button's Y position. Cool. So now we have the basics of a button here. Now first, let's say local btn text for the button text is equal to an empty table, and we'll get back to this in the future. Then our function is equal to the function passed in. Or if there's no function passed in, we can then say or function, and we can just remove this end, or we can just not remove it, but just bring it to the end of this statement. So one-liner function, print, and we can just print this button has no function attached. So basically, if they save or if they click the button and they didn't add a function to it, it will print out to the console, hey, there's no function attached to this button. You can't click it. Next up, I want to position the text of the button. Now, if you remember from the previous tutorial or from the previous game we made, where if I were to go here, as you see our buttons, they have a little space here. But if you could remember from the code we wrote for these buttons, is that the text in the button is positioned relative to the button itself. Meaning, if we position a button here, then and we say the text is 10 pixels to the right, then it's going to be inside of the button by default 10 pixels to the right. Meaning the text isn't going to be 10 pixels from the border of the screen. It's going to be 10 pixels from the border of the button. If you can't quite remember what we did here, I do recommend you maybe go back to the files and just go check on how we created that button. And maybe that will bring back some flashbacks. But it's not a big piece of code we have to write for that. So let's quickly do that. So if text y, so if the y position was provided, then btn and then text dot y will be equal to text underscore y plus button y. So plus the y position of the button, because it needs to be the amount we give it plus the button. Otherwise, we'll have to manually calculate, if you want it on the center of the button, where the center of the button would be relative to where we already have it. So we anyways have to do this later on if we want the text to be inside of the button. And you can still make the text outside of the button even with this method here. You just use minus or just a massive value, depending on what you want to do. Anyhow, let's continue because it's a big file. Then we can yet again just go like whoop, go like this, and then do this, but without this. Now you have a choice here, and let me just go back to y here. You have a choice. You can either do this if-else statement, or you can go here and say y is equal to, and then button y, and then you can remove this part here. This will work just as well. So it's up to you what you want to do. However, I'm going to use this else statement here. You can then copy this, and now you can do it for x. And in here you can just change this to x. And there we go. We have just as quickly added our x and y positions for the buttons, or for the text on the button. Now let's go here and we can just say text color is equal to text color. Or if they didn't specify text color, we can just make it white. So R is equal to 1, G is equal to 1, and B is equal to 1. Like that. And we can do the same for button color. So button color is equal to button color, or, and we can just copy this one here. However, the difference will be is that by default the button color should not be white, because the text is already white. So if they didn't enter the text or the button color, you want to make sure that the text is still visible, since the button would now be black. You can swap these two if you want to, but yeah. And we can go the width of the button is equal to the width we enter, or 100. And then the height of the button is equal to the height we enter, or 100. The text is equal to text, or, and you don't have to specify or with any of these. I'm just doing it for in case I want to leave something out, or in case you might want to leave something out in the future. The more customized this is, the more things you can later on leave out. Anyhow, and then no text added. So no text was added, we can just put that there. Or you could force it, it depends on what you want. The text X position is equal to the text position passed in. And we're not using this text position here quite yet, but you will see in a second where we use that. Or we can make it the button X. Or if they didn't specify at all, we can just make it 0. We can do the same for the Y text position, where all the X's are just Y's. And we can go here and say the button X position is equal to the button X position or 0. And in the button Y position is equal to the button Y position or 0. Cool. And then finally, we need to use a text component that will put the text on the screen for us. And we already have a text component that's been imported right here. And every button will have its own text component. So we can just say text component is equal to text, and then we can just pass in all our values. So we can say text btn text.x. So here we use the button text, but here we specifically use the x and y given to us. And we can of course do the same but for y. And as you can see, also our documentation is here, which is very nice. And this is some documentation we did a while back. So here we go, and as you can see, we did a bunch of documentation, and now the documentation appears as I'm trying to edit this. So that's pretty neat. So now we know we need the font size, and the font size is passed in. And then also whether we want it to fade in, which is false. We don't want it to fade in unless you want to add some animation. Fade out is also false. The width, and then the text align like that. And then finally for the opacity, we can just pass in 1. We don't want to change the opacity. However, if you have buttons in your game, you want to make this a dynamic value. So value passed in as a variable and not just one. So it depends on what you want to do. If there's buttons in your game and not just in the menu, so when they pause and you want it to fade out when you pause, then making this an actual variable would be better, because you can change the variable later. Let's draw the button, because I actually want to get the button on the screen. So draw is equal to function self, and we can just add in our comma. Then here we just say love.graphics.set color, so the color we want the button to be, and we can go self dot button color and then just specify red. And we can do that for all of the colors we have. So let's do that. And there we go. Now the color will be set to what we want the button color to be. Then we can draw a rectangle. So love.graphics.rectangle. And we can just say fill this rectangle. Or don't fill it. It depends on what you want. But I would like to fill it. Since it's a button, it makes sense to fill it. Self, then the button X. Self.button Y. Self.width. And then self.height. And this will draw the button for us. Next up, we need to do the same. But instead for the button, we need to do it for the text. And we also want to reset the color back to white. So here we can go here, but instead of button color, we now go text color. And then we can just say self.text component dot draw, or just colon draw instead. And this will draw the text component for us because it already has its own draw function. Cool. Now that's the basics for the button. We'll be getting back to this a little bit later in the tutorial. I just want to get the button on the screen right now. Next, we can go and we can create a new file in the states folder called menu.lua, because it's a new state we have. And then you can require love, so local love is equal to require love local button, and it should be with capital B, is equal to require components.button. And then we can say function menu takes in nothing yet, and then we can just return a table, and we can return menu, and this will return a menu for us. Now we can just take in the game and we'll get to Y, and then the player and we'll also get to Y. Next we want to draw the buttons, and the buttons are pretty big, so local, and let's just draw one for now. Buttons is equal to, and then here we say a new button. The function we have, we can just say nil for now. because there's no function. Then the text color, which can be nil, and then nil again for the button color. The width can be love.graphics.getWidth divided by 3, and it will give it a nice, rather smallish width. And then the height can just be 50. The text can say new game. It can be aligned in center. I need to make that lowercase c. The text size can be H3 or the font size. The button X position can be love.graphics.getWidth divided by 3, and it will kind of make it a little bit in the center. And then love.graphics.getHeight, and this is for the Y position, and this can be times 0.25, and it will kind of make it go a quarter way down. Okay, so these are our buttons we have. We'll add more a little bit later. So here we can just say draw as a function is equal to function taken self for, and then underscore button in buttons. So for every button we want to draw it, and so we just call button colon draw. Cool. We have just created our menu. We'll get back to this a little bit later. We can go all the way up to load. And now we don't want this start new game anymore, because we don't want to start a new game as soon as we start or as soon as we boot it up. We want to go to the menu first. So you say menu is equal to menu game player. So just pass in these two into the menu. So the menu has to be below the player and the game. Now here in the love.mouse pressed, we can just add a global scope variable. We can go here, else, and just say clicked mouse is equal to true. So if the mouse has been clicked, we'll use this later, but we don't have to worry about it now. It's just so it exists. Then we can go down here, and where it says if game state is running, we can go all the way to the bottom, and we can go else if game.state.menu. So if it's a menu state, and we can say clicked mouse is equal to false by default. And we'll get back to this a little bit later as well. And then finally, here in draw, else if game.state.menu, and we just say menu colon draw. Now when we run the game, we should be able to see a button on the screen. Okay, so it was the first attempt, so okay, we haven't imported menu yet. That makes sense. So we can just go here, say local menu is equal to require states.menu. There we go. So we have our first button. It just looks like text because the button color itself isn't a different color. We could, if we wanted to, change the button color to be something different. So here instead of menu, where we set the button color, which would be this one, we can go R is equal to G is equal to 1, and in blue is equal to 0. Now this should give us a yellow button. So there's the button. I just made it the same color as the background to kind of made it more mystic, so it kind of looks like there is no button, but there is actually a button. We can just say nil back here again. And we have just created our first button. Now let's draw our cursor or mouse. Because if we go here, we can't really see our mouse. So we can just go if not, and then game.state.running. And we're not putting this inside of this menu checked state here. We're putting it inside of a not game state running. The reason for it is because sometimes we want to see the cursor even if the game state isn't necessarily running. For example, on the game over screen, we might want to see the cursor. In the settings screen, that's maybe another state, depending on how you code the game. You want to still see the cursor. In the paused state, you still want to see the cursor. So it depends on what you want to do here. Here we're just saying if it's a running state, remove the cursor, because we already have the player on the screen. We don't want the cursor as an extra annoyance. And we can just say love.graphics.circle, and we can specify fill mouse X, mouse Y, and then 10. If you want an extra nice kind of challenge, you can draw the player cursor the same way you draw an asteroid. So then the player cursor is an asteroid. That can be pretty cool. Or you can make the player cursor like the spaceship as well, but then you move over with your mouse. It depends on what you want. Personally, for me, this little circle here, that's all I need, as you can see here. So it's a nice little circle that just shows my cursor. Now let's finish implementing the button, because it's a pretty big thing we got to implement, but we did the biggest part, so it's not that big of a deal now. So first, I would like to add a function to make it easier to change the button color. Now I want a way to make the button color not only settable outside of setting the button color on create, but to also make it easily settable anywhere in the game. So we can say set button color is equal to function. We take in self red, green, blue. Then here we say self dot button color, and I'm just going to copy this because this is quite a thing to type out. We can go here, say that is equal to, and we just say red, green, and blue respectively. There we go. Now it's very easy to set the color. We just say set button color and we specify the number. We don't necessarily need to specify the RGB anymore. Next we want to do the same but for the text color. So I'm going to copy this, paste it, and instead of saying button color we can say text color. Red, green, blue, but instead of button color we can say text color. Easy. Now below the draw we can also get or set a few methods here to get the position of the button and the position of the text. So get pause. You could also make this get button pause. It depends on what you want to do. But saying get button pause will kind of work with all of these, like set button color, set text color. So saying get button position would be smart. Pass in self and we can just return self dot button X and self dot button Y. We just separate them by a comma, so we're getting two values from this function. Two of them, not just one, so take note of that. We can then go get text pause, and we can actually just copy and paste this, to be honest. So get text pause, and instead of button X and button Y, we say text X and text Y. Cool. We have just implemented a ton of functions that could be useful in the future. Only two more to go. I also want a function that once we click the mouse, like once we click, it should basically execute the function we have passed in here. So down here, you can just say click is equal to function, takes in self, and we can just say func. So it will just execute the function we have. Doesn't do anything special, that's all it does, it just executes that function. Cool. And then the last one is just check hover. So we want to check if we're hovering over the button. So if the cursor is currently hovering over the button. That is equal to a function that takes itself the mouse X position, the mouse Y position, and then the cursor radius. Then we can just do this. I just paste it in, but I'll explain it. So you first get the mouse X and then plus the cursor radius, and I have explained this quite a few times, especially in the first tutorial where we did the balls. Basically, if a circle, or we have a circle but we want to add the radius to that circle. In this scenario, since the button X is here, we want to add a radius to it both ways. That is why the button X here has the plus radius and then the button X here has the minus radius. If you haven't seen the previous tutorial where we did build a game where we like play around with balls, then I do recommend you go watch that tutorial, because it is quite a good intro to this tutorial as well. So I don't have to re-explain this right here, because that just does everything the same as what we did with our player back then. So we just check if the mouse X and Y is above a button X or and Y. If it is, we return true. So here's the X and then here's the Y checking. If it is, we return true. Otherwise, we just return false. Cool, and that is all there is for the button. Next is the menu. Let's finish up here. So let's go here and create a bunch of functions we might want to do. So local funcs is equal to a table. First, we have our new game. So this is when they click the new game button. That is equal to a function. And this function just goes game, start new game. And we pass in the player. And that is why we needed the player and the game passed in. We also want a quit game function. So if they click the quit button, which we'll put in a second. So quit game is equal to another function. And then love.graphics. Not graphics, that should be event. My bad. .quit. And this will quit the game for us once we click the button. Cool. Now we have our two functions we want to use. This button here, I'm going to copy and paste it 3 times. First here with this nil, I'm going to pass in funcs.newGame. Take note, however, I'm not passing in brackets. I'm not doing that. I'm just passing in the name. No brackets. Take note of that. And here at the bottom one, you can just say funcs dot and then quit game. Yet again, no brackets. Okay, then with this button here, we can change the text here to settings for the settings button. And since all of the buttons will be positioned below each other, the x-axis, so this get width part right here, can stay the same. But since they're pushed below each other, we can change this right here to 0.4, and that will make this button here a tiny bit more below this button right here, which is the new game button. And in here, of course, we can say instead of new game, we can just say quit. And instead of 0.25, we can say 5.5. Nice. So we have just created our buttons and the functions that go with them. Now let's see if they get drawn. And there we go. New game, settings, quit. Now we need to do a few checks. So once we hover over a button, we want it to change color to red. And if we click a button, we want to execute a specific function. So let's go down here, and first we can say focused. That will be in empty string. And then we can create a function called run. And this function just takes itself, and if we have clicked, we can then get the local position of the mouse, so mouse X and mouse Y, which is equal to love.mouse.getPosition, as we return both the X and Y position. And then we can go for name and button in buttons, so the buttons we have here. We can check if button and then check hover, which we have just implemented. We can pass in the mouse X and then the mouse Y. If you wanted to, you could have just made this mouse X, Y already implemented inside of the check hover, but here I just pass it in because why not? And we can pass in 10, and this will be the cursor radius we have. I recommend you make this a variable instead, that's maybe global or passed in or something like that, because if you ever want to change the radius of the cursor, then you have to come back here and change it as well. So I recommend you make it like a variable and maybe pass it in here or something like that. Anyhow, so if the cursor is hovering above the button, we can just say if clicked, and we get clicked past in here, then button colon click. So we want to execute the button function we have. And it's itself.focused, and this is basically if the button was not clicked in a sense, but it's not inside of an else, is equal to name, or we make it equal to name, and you go button, and then set text color to 0.8, 0.8, 0.2, and this should also be 0.2. As we'll give it a nice reddish color when we hover over it. Else, we want to say button set text color 111. Currently this focused, we are not using it. We'll use it a little bit later, but it is there for once we want to use it. Cool. The menu has now been coded, but we are never executing this run yet, so we need to go and execute this run. Now it is pretty simple. We can just go here to main.lua. Here we say mouse clicked is false. We can just say menu colon run, and then mouse clicked, or clicked mouse. There we go. And just like that, we have implemented the menu. That was like the last line of code. However, if we hover over it, we're not getting anything yet, so something might still be wrong. However, the buttons work. So if you go here, click quit, it works. If you go here, you say new game, it starts a new game. So the buttons work. However, the color is not changing yet. And right here, where we have this love graphics set color, this should actually be self.text component colon set color. Which if we were to go to the text component here, it has a function called set color, where it sets the color for us as well. So it has its own color function. We can then take this, what we have here, and we can paste it in here. That is why it didn't go the color we wanted it to go to. Now we have our button colors as well. If we click on settings, that will do nothing but just print out some text. If we click quit, that will quit the game. And then finally, if we say new game, it will start a new game where we can crash and we can shoot and whatnot. Alright, that was a pretty big tutorial. Well done if you sat through the whole thing. Thank you all for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you all again in the next Love2D tutorial.